Welcome to Midlife Unraveled, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the twists and turns of midlife. I'm your host, Anita Gilbert, and I've transitioned from the corporate world of investment banking to become the proud owner of a yoga and Pilates studio. Together, we're going to navigate the exhilarating roller coaster that is midlife. Each episode, we dive deep with a seasoned expert to rediscover and redefine how to live our best during this life-changing period. Join us every Tuesday for new episodes, brimming with wisdom, insights, inspiration, and a laugh along the way. So strap in, because Midlife Unraveled is about to redefine the way you embrace midlife. Subscribe today and take this journey with us. I am so delighted to welcome Mel Greenhalgh to our Midlife Unraveled episode today. She is the founder of Collective Wisdom Coaching and Consulting, and she empowers women to create and live fulfilling lives through evidence-based behavioral and cognitive neuroscience practices. That's what I really love about what Mel does. She really does ground everything in science. She's an experienced coach with over 25 years experience offering services that facilitate personal growth. She helps women to pursue their true desires, aligning their successes with their values and develop more compassionate relationships with themselves. You'll really get a feel for that in our conversation today. Mel's approach leverages the emotional brain to move from exhaustion to alignment. I hope you enjoy the episode today. Thank you. I'm very excited today to welcome Mel Greenhalgh to the Midlife Unraveled podcast. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you so much, Anita, for having me. I'm so excited.
I know. I'm really looking forward to this chat. What I absolutely love about the work that you do is that you are very grounded in science as well. Is that it is something that you have worked on for so many years. You've seen so many women in midlife, and this is something that I'm so pleased to be able to share with so many people. So let's kick off.
Okay.
First of all, how do we recognize where we are now?
You know, it's a really interesting question. One of the things that we really find difficult is to actually get a sense of potentially who we are, where we're at, and you know, even and what we want at in this time of our life, because there's so much changing. And I get it, like every year it brings growth and change and opportunities. But I think that particularly when we're talking about this midlife period for women, we have children, if women have have families, things are starting to shift around independence, and there's this creation of time, and there's less dependence of the physical nature, potentially still a lot in the emotional nature of raising children, but careers might be shifting and changing. Certainly what we want, we may have been somebody that's gone from really big social circles, as an example. I hear this a lot, and women going, what's wrong with me? I just want to hang out with these 3 or 4 women that I really love. And so there's a lot of tension there about, there's almost a resistance, because we want to stay connected to the idea of who we are. But we also know that it's kind of spinning on its axis, and it can feel really confronting or even painful to go, okay, what does this look like now? But one of the things that I really would sort of say in that space is, and it sounds a little bit cliched, but it is about that self-reflection.
Yeah.
It's a little bit about the assessment of where you're at, and that means sort of going to the past with consent and taking stock. Because, and without sort of being too science nerdy sort of thing, but
go ahead, I love it.
But the fact is, that our brain is actually wired to look for the negative, right? It wants to do that in order to mitigate the risk to our lives
and keep us safe,
right? Every time, yeah. But we can often find ourselves resisting that. So it can feel really, you're like, that's going to hurt. That's going to be a little bit painful for me to stop and take stock of life. But I really do think that we need to do it because you want to go looking for the gold.
Yeah. I feel like at this time in life, like in midlife, we suddenly pop our heads up, and having a little bit of space to think and to sort of process what's going on around us. And suddenly the kids don't need you as much anymore. Suddenly, maybe work has taken a slower pace. And we're sort of reassessing and thinking, actually, I've got a lot of good years left.
Yeah.
And what am I doing and how am I going to approach this? And actually, I hadn't really even considered the social life part of it. But you're right. I know a lot of people who are like, I don't want to go out. I used to go out all the time. I don't want to anymore. And I'm happier to do lunch than do dinner. And I don't want a big night. And, I hadn't even considered that. But if that's part of your identity is the kind of the social one, the one that tends to organize other people as well. Because, there's always that person in the friendship group who does organize everybody else. And when they're suddenly taking a back seat going, no, I'm out. Nothing happens. And then everyone's kind of looking to them to organize these things. And that's just one example. But I feel like this happens a lot.
And sort of to point that out, because I think the social aspect is a really easy sort of example to anchor to. And one of the things I say is that a lot of women, a lot of clients that I sit with will say, but I'm an extrovert. And they say, but I'm finding myself, pulling away a little bit. And I don't know, maybe they often feel it's like they're being a bit more reclusive and probably doing more introverted type behaviors, right? But it's about so much more than that. And it's about the fact that spectrum of introversion through to extrovert, we are neither one nor the other. We are a mixture of that. And as we move through life, whether it's age, stage, things that are happening, stresses we might be experiencing, we'll find that the volume on each of those may be turned up and maybe turned down, right? And so you get this this adjustment of that. And it's okay. I think the thing that we find that's really interesting is that we need to give ourselves permission to change, to shift, to grow. And I love that. I call it a meerkat moment, right?
Yes.
Midlife, where we're like, we're like, oh my God.
That's a visual I had before, like popping your head up and you're sort of looking around.
How did I get here? Who am I? What do I want? And I think that it is just to have a really gentle acceptance that it's okay not to have all the answers right now. That just like your life up until this moment has been an evolution, it will continue that evolution as you move through. The difference is, and this is why we get really uncomfortable with it as women, is that, of course, the focus has shifted from being external to us to suddenly it's like, oh my God, the mirror is pointing back at me.
Yeah.
These are the moments where, and I'm really putting this out there, a really lovely little exercise that you can do to reconnect with yourself. And it sounds silly and it feels a bit silly.
The best ones always are.
I know, but I have to say too, I really applied myself to this for kind of 3 months straight. And I realized that I never actually looked at myself in the mirror. So for 90 days, every day, I would hop up and I would just take a moment to look in the mirror and actually look at myself in the eye. And I would just pop a hand up to the mirror. And there's a lot of obviously science behind it, but that connection with self, and it was very emotional. And I realized how much my life was rushing to a mirror to brush my teeth, do a face, or those sorts of things. But there was actually I didn't see the reflection.
We don't really look.
Correct. And so particularly if you've had that space, I got quite shocked. I was like, oh, where did where did all those laugh lines come
Yeah,
from?
it's pretty confronting. Like, I think when
Yeah.
we do look at ourselves in the mirror, it's always very judgmental. It's like,
Yes.
oh, I got that line, or oh, that's looking, my eyes are rough, or oh, my makeup is looking skewed, or whatever. But it's always in judgment. It's not
Yes.
in a open-minded way.
Mm. And part of that practice of just, connecting and touching your own hand on the mirror is to, for some people it's affirmations, but it might just be a little message for the day, and it's
Yeah,
around that real connection of self-worth,
yeah,
because so much of what we've created is about, well, if the kids are doing well, then I'm doing well.
yeah,
If my relationship is okay, then I'm okay. If I'm keeping everything going at work and people see me as successful, then everything must be okay. And so, some of those, it's almost like some of those tectonic plates start to
mm.
shift a bit.
There's an element of control as well, I think, because
Mm,
we are used to being in control of everything. We're in control of how we organize the kids, and who's going where, and controlling. And I feel like women more so than men tend to do that, um, emotional planning as well.
yeah.
Like organizing, Johnny to go to the birthday party, and making sure he's got a present, and making sure that there's food in the fridge, and making sure that all those things,
All of
controlling
it.
all those scenarios. And then suddenly, when the need for that element of control is taken away, or not taken away, but is no longer required,
Yeah.
then suddenly there can be a lot of vulnerabilities. It's like finding your place, like where
Mm,
almost,
mm.
who needs me now?
Yeah, yeah. And interestingly though, often the answer is I need me now.
Yeah.
You
But
know,
that takes you to a place of vulnerability.
yes,
It really does.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think though, there, before actually, Anita, when you mentioned about judgment, and it's a really lovely thing is to try and not switch them out totally for one another, but to almost slide yourself towards this idea of curiosity,
Hmm.
right? As so I've done a bit of an assessment of my life and the things that, I've achieved and that I'm really good at, starting to reconnect with your values
Yeah.
curiously, starting to, out of that activity of really thinking, what did I do, in my teens, what that I loved and I was really great at? What did I do in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, my 50s, wherever
Yeah.
people are at? And really connecting to the strengths, and looking at it and going, what values was I really connected to
Yeah.
in that time that guided me and that saw me through? And in some ways, that approaching that with curiosity again and thinking, like, what are my values now?
They can
Right?
change, and they can change a lot.
Correct. And what we know is that generally you'll have like a top 30 to 50. I almost say to people, it's a little bit like the music charts.
That sounds
And
like a lot.
yeah, it is. What you find is that they tend to get grouped into kind of like the top 5 or 6, right?
Okay.
But you've got this because there's a lot of detail in them. Like what's one person's idea of social justice and fairness and honesty, might be different for someone else. So and you find that as you move through different phases of life and you may have incidents where you really need to draw on your values, they tend to change. So something that might have been hanging out at number 30 might find its way up into the top 10, for a period of time, and then they shift. And it's always interesting when I say to people, when was the last time you connected with your values? And they're like, oh, well, like a couple of years ago at
Yeah.
work, we had to do this thing. And I'm like, okay, well,
It's doing that
let's,
values exercise. You look at it and go, oh, yeah, that's so true. And then it goes to the bottom of the drawer.
right, and exactly. But yet there's so much powerful information in there about yourself. And again, that you can use to kind of almost pop it in the backpack and go, okay, where is this taking me? Like,
Mm.
what does this look like? So almost trying to support yourself a little bit to be, I talk about going gently because there's enough, hustle and grind and harshness and criticism and judgment in the world, right? And
Yeah.
we definitely often have that relationship with self. So, just even if it's just, small steps, tiny tweaks, nice nudges, where you just remind yourself, I don't know, what could I possibly do with some of that space that I find now?
Yeah.
And the answer might not come right at the end of that question, but it might come in a week, a month, who knows? But just curiously sowing the seed can often activate the brain to start to look for the solution.
Yeah. I feel like also when we take something to the front of the mind and we start to think about that, and we don't, like you said, you don't need to have a solution straight away, but just opening the door on that nugget of conversation, or that nugget of thought that we had, can actually lead to so much thought. So then taking the space to, maybe go for a walk. And I always think that when we open ourselves out, we're not constantly taking in information. We actually give ourselves time, our brains a chance to process things. So if you're on your phone the whole time, if you're looking at screens the whole time, you don't actually get that space. So we need to actively take that space to think about these things.
And look, and when you hear, and look, many women in that are listening or watching will be going, oh, they would have heard of mindfulness, they would have heard of meditation. There's lots of practices that we can do, and the reason, and this is what is really reinforcing what you're saying, Anita, is that the reason we need to do that is because what we want to do is elongate the space between the thoughts that we're having. And so when we're on computers, when we're doing these things right now, the space between my thoughts is very small because I'm needing to respond in real time.
Yeah.
But tonight, when I do my nice little 20-minute, breathe, and I have my legs up in the air to,
love it. Legs
help
up
with my help with my newly, diagnosed bloody, lymphatic problem. This is it, ladies. We've made it. I do that. Okay, some nights it's pretty good, but the idea is to take the pressure off myself. It's not about perfection. I'm not trying to clear my mind. Even I mean, you can do this while you're having a shower, right?
Yeah.
And walking, or jumping on the bike, or, having a cup of tea and just noticing the leaves moving. Right.
I always think I was trying to explain this to my kids too. Like, if you get the bus, you don't have to have your AirPods in all the time. Just my daughter was saying, "Well, what did you do on the bus?" So we didn't have those sort of things. I said, "We just sat and looked out the window." I had an hour and a half in the bus too to get to the city, so it was a long staring out the window. But you just had time with your thoughts. So it's actually really nice to say, actually, I'm not going to be on my phone.
Yes.
I'm just going to sit and look out the window, or I'm going to look at the people coming onto the bus. And
exactly.
That sort of thing. I feel like just to take that space, we don't have to crowd our heads with absorbing information every second of the day.
And that's that thing. What you're talking about is that creating mindfulness, but also you create that space, and that's when the magic drops in.
Yeah.
That's actually when your answers come, because there's an opportunity for it to find a place to come in. And everybody knows that. Everybody's had that experience where they're
great idea in the shower.
Right? And you're like, I need a marker in here too. I often do that. Or you're walking the dog and you're just like, oh, of course that's the answer.
Yeah.
Yes,
exactly.
I know that's what I need to do. And it's so interesting because, as you say, we're now consumed with, this idea of, I suppose, devices and stimulation.
Yeah.
And that's where we tend to fall into that compare and despair. So which is never helpful for us. Yeah.
That's right. I want to just also come back to something you mentioned before about going back. And actually going back, and did you mean back to our teenage years, childhood, to really sort of unpack what's going on there and how that might be influencing us now?
Yeah, so I've worked a lot with people who have experienced a lot of trauma in their lives, and one of the things that you want to do when you're recovering in those situations is you want to learn how to hold yourself safe and manage your triggers. And a really lovely way that we can do that, and this is a strategy that you can use for anything. It doesn't have to be related to trauma, but the idea of going to the past with consent. So, triggers, as an example, and most people live with a set of triggers for whatever has occurred for them. And they can be really positive ones too, right? We smell a particular scent and we're,
it takes us back. Yeah.
Those sorts of things. So, if we know that that's possible via, I suppose, the reactions in our brains, what we can actually do is use that strategy, but we're in control of it. So we don't need to we don't need to wait to be triggered. We can actually say, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back and reflect on that time of my life, and then I get to decide what I want to bring forward. Yeah. So that might be, for instance, when we're talking about someone who's maybe struggled or had a really difficult time. For me, without going into it, but I had a decade of disaster, and it took me a long time to be able to go back there, but now I quite frequently go back there because there's so much strength and wisdom and really interesting information about me as a human being.
And you're almost controlling the narrative on that. So
yes,
I feel like when there is, past trauma, being vulnerable to that trauma controlling you is a really is probably how it's always been. But like you said, doing it with consent and doing it in a measured way can allow you to overcome that and to be okay with that, to sit with it, and to and not saying it's solved and it's cleared from your mind forever, but in a way that you can carry that with you and carry the learnings with you, I suppose.
Yes. And definitely to also be able to understand what those triggers are, as an example, and then not necessarily avoid them, but go, well, how do I actually support myself if there, that may come into my life, So, and look, the reality is there's probably lots of women, when I say to them, one of the most frequent reasons that I do a lot of this work is to help women manage things in workplaces where there's really toxic, whether it's managers or team members. And of course, the reality is that there is a social expectation, right? That you turn up and play.
Yeah.
But you can do that where that external situation is controlling you, which most often happens because the women are like, what am I doing wrong? But, there's ways that we can, really hack the brain, I suppose, to be able to keep yourself safe while you're doing that exploration and you understand what it is. What can I do to keep myself safe?
Can you give us some examples?
Look, a lot of what you want to understand at the moment, I think a lot of women are probably feeling like they're living outside of their window of tolerance. So when we think about our autonomic nervous system, which is, the thing that is really helping us regulate in life. And so if you're experiencing menopausal symptoms, or peri, or you're right in the thick of it, we have to be aware that then what feels safe and unsafe can be really different. Okay. So, but as examples, there are self-soothing techniques. So if you sort of bust through your window of tolerance, which is where you're really functioning at your best. Yeah, that's when you're in flow. You're like, I've got this. I know what I'm doing.
All over it.
All over it. And then you shoot through the roof of it and you're up in your parasympathetic nervous system. So you're very much activated, and that's sort of those fight flight tendencies that we feel. So we want to get out of the room, or we want to literally sometimes tear the person's head off, right?
Which we're not recommending as a course of action.
No, it tends to end not very
badly.
Well. But what we know is that there are a whole heap of self-soothing activities that we can help us bring ourselves back into a place of regulation, right? So they could be things like, I give lots of clients warheads, which are super sour. They're a super sour lolly. And
okay, I was wondering what warheads were.
yeah,
Okay, so they're like a jelly lolly.
yeah, well, they're a bit of a hard candy, and they have this horrible sour coating of them, and you put them in your mouth, and the instant reaction is, like sucking on a lemon, right?
Yeah.
And what that does is there's a strap across the hemispheres of our brain, and it helps us bring both hemispheres up and go, hang on a second, what do you need to do right now to keep yourself safe? It could be things like, if you've ever felt overwhelmed, flustered, you find yourself walking towards the bathroom and you're putting water onto your face. That is a way of resetting yourself and trying to regulate and get back into that window of tolerance, which we call the ventral vagal state. So things like if you're at your desk and you have a ball and a stress ball, just moving the stress ball from one hand to the other, any item, even if you had a pen, right? Moving your hand, the pen from one hand to the other, is a way to bring the brain back online. Standing up, and we do this with kids all the time. Shake it out.
Yeah.
Right. So I have been known to go off to the bathroom and shut the door and shake it out. Right. So
What about our breath?
Oh, look, without a
so
doubt.
It's the classic thing of like deep breathing,
Yes.
lengthening the exhale breath.
Yes. And so if you can't leave a space, or you're in a meeting as an example, or, even with your partner or your kids, and you need to be present in that moment, I often just get people to focus on their breathing and slowing, they're touching their fingers and slowing it down, which you can be doing under the desk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, so there's lots of little ways that you can help yourself. But do you want to know one of the biggest things that we struggle to do is, we need to give ourselves permission to say, can I think about that?
Yeah. No, we don't. We don't.
So, and the truth is that there are people that walk the earth that are very, very good. The way their brain operates is that in the moment, they can find the right words, they can say the right things, they may be able to make decisions very quickly. But I'm not even going to say they don't even really make up 50% of the population. There's actually more people that roam the earth that need time. They need to consider things.
Yeah.
They need to let things percolate.
Yeah.
And yet, because we live in a world that's about, now, and productivity and hustle and grind and buy it.
Yeah.
We all tend to get subsumed into that cultural sort of aspect of life. And anybody that's listening, because we've all done it, both my hands are up if I had more. But that moment where you say, yeah, I can do that, and you haven't even blinked.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, I can't do that.
Yeah. Or I don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that. Okay.
Or you agree to it and think it's so far ahead in the future that it won't never come. And then it does, and then you're stuck making excuses.
So, and a part of that, it is about, because often people will say to you, oh, well, that's about boundaries, and I'd say, yeah, sure, boundaries is the bigger piece. It's actually the bigger piece. And it's the practices that we work towards with those small steps, nice nudges, tiny tweaks, right? But what it actually starts with is, okay, can I have some time to consider that?
Yeah.
Is it okay if I think about this and get back to you? Yeah. And to the point where, and I do this all the time, I work with so many different women, but a lot of them that are in the workplace, in particular, I get them to write it in the back of their notepad of the moment.
Mhm.
So if they find themselves and they're thinking, I probably need to sit on my hands or zip my mouth because I'm going to say yes again.
Yeah.
And I say, just flip to the back and look at that sentence.
Mm. Or it may not be that they don't want to agree to something, but it may be also a case of they just don't know the answer. You
Yes.
may not have the
No.
answers, and it may be a case of you feel very much you feel very vulnerable, you feel out of your depth because you don't have the answers to that. And that's something that I think would relate to so many people, whatever age.
Yep.
So
Without a
that
doubt.
so that phrase is
Mm.
something that you can just, keep in your toolbox
Yeah. Without
and
a doubt.
pull it out whenever you need to, because I feel like it just buys you that space.
It
It
does.
it puts it into your control. I don't want to say control again, but it puts it into your space of influence
Mm.
and then allows you to think and to percolate and to actually, take a long shower and do all
Yeah.
those techniques to give it the
Yeah.
fair amount of consideration.
Yeah. Go and get some fresh air and then think about it. And yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, very, very important at times, to be kind to yourself. And
Yeah.
it's interesting too, because usually when someone steps into that space and maybe asks that question and says, can I just have some time to consider this? Or can I have some time to think of, the way that we could move forward with this, whatever it may be? There are so many other people in the room that all go, oh,
Thank goodness
that's
that they asked the
great.
question.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. So you're not just helping yourself; you're helping others as well. So
yeah.
it's I find that really interesting. Yeah.
So we've looked at our triggers. And we've looked at our triggers and how
Mm.
we can try and manage those. So I want to get a better picture from you of, okay, we've got those triggers that can bring on that trauma, that worry, that concern of something in the past.
Mm.
How do we move forward with that, knowing that, okay, fine, we know what the triggers are, we know what that brings up in us. How do we move forward with the space and with the mindset to really handle that going forward and to sort of
Mm.
free ourselves, like, almost from the harness of that, letting that pull us down?
Mm. Look, I think, it's always going to be a combo approach. So, and particularly when you find yourself in any space where you're trying to reclaim something, you're wanting to investigate and get curious and understand more. I think that, you know, when we're implementing changes or when we're thinking about what does it look like next, it is a little bit about finding that support network,
Mm-hmm.
and hence why things like this podcast, as an example, the idea of a support network doesn't necessarily have to be an in-person support network.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great to have some, obviously, and we want to encourage that
Yeah.
because it's so beneficial to us. But it's also about finding the places where it gives you that the information that's of a high quality
Yeah.
and actually informs and supports you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
I feel
think
like the feeling that you're not alone is huge too. Just
huge,
like,
huge.
it's not just me feeling like this.
Exactly.
Other people, it may be it may look different, but the essence is the same.
Absolutely. Yeah, very important. And um, I think the idea of, and I keep banging on about it a little bit, but it is that idea of just practicing a little bit more about being kinder to yourself. And again, that's not about admonishing yourself when you hear or you connect with the idea that maybe, you've walked around and you've said, oh my God, you're so stupid.
Mm.
It's not then about catching that moment and kind of digging in deeper. It is just a little bit about, oh, and I say this all the time, that's interesting information, right? Because it is. It's like, but you've also kind of set the intent that you'd just like to shift the relationship you have with yourself.
Yeah.
So because so often when we're talking about people, whether they're recovering from something that, and, I suppose the industry might term big T, little t traumas, which they're just relative, right? But sometimes people go, oh, well, I shouldn't feel this way because what's going on for me isn't as bad as.
But it's the biggest thing that's going on in their life, and that's relative. And I
Exactly.
sort of think we can't,
Exactly.
it's very easy to, stand in judgment and say, well, your trauma is bigger than my
Mm.
trauma. but
Not
it's not
helpful.
no, not helpful at all, because that's what that individual is dealing with at the
Yeah,
time. And that to them
exactly.
is the biggest trauma that they know.
That's exactly
So,
right.
and you may look at somebody else dealing with what in your view is something really minor, and but to them it's not minor. To them it is all encompassing, and
That's right.
they are trying to deal with that. So I feel like we need to just shift that. When that thought comes in, we need to
Yeah.
shift it and just
Yeah.
concentrate on dealing with what we have.
Yeah.
um
And I do really think, particularly when you're looking at how do you manage, whether it, you might really think, I'd like to understand my triggers more. It's really the process of getting to know them. And often people will find, journaling, writing, things. But when I say that, I also want to preface that with the idea that, we so often think, oh, well, if I start journaling, I have to journal every day. No, you don't. It's a tool. It's
yeah
a strategy. Use it when it's useful, right? The truth is most people, I mean, it's, if you're anything like, me or a lot of other people, yeah, you tend to bring the
yeah
journal out when things are a bit tough, right? To be able to reflect on them. But when you're going
yeah
well, I mean, you're just out there having fun, experiencing joy, and you're having a good time, right? So, but this idea of always like I have to do it 7 days a week, or it's perfection and it doesn't exist.
yeah
So we need to go, okay, this is a tool, and how do I want to use it? So if you're learning and you're relating, and maybe you're doing that idea of going to the past with consent, what writing down what it is, what it looks like, how it makes you feel,
yeah
what does it do with maybe your relationship with food or your relationship with alcohol, or like what do you like with your family?
yeah
Mine tends to be that, my level of tolerance is very small and short. And
I think we can all relate to that at times.
but when you get to know that and you acknowledge it, then what I really love is that then you can start to put language to it. So if you're in a situation with your family, which is, depending, but for a lot of people, it is a safe place to experiment. Not for everybody, and I understand that. But find a safe space to then, when you are feeling a bit crotchety and a bit overwhelmed and a bit maybe underdone, using the language that says, just like we talked about before, I think I need some space,
Yeah
or I think I need a hug,
yeah
or I'm going to go and have a shower, right? To
yes
self-soothe, like that water is beautiful. But taking it from a place of awareness to understanding and then into action.
I love that. You love that idea of having the tools. So even if we think
Mm,
about three things, like
yep,
take having a hug, taking
yep,
yourself out of the situation, going for a walk or whatever it happens to be, and going for a shower. I love
yep,
that. It's just like I need some space. I just and having knowing that you have those three ways of managing whatever situation comes up. And if you do start to feel that, and I think we throw menopause into the mix, and those that little window becomes actually almost minuscule and
yep,
non-existent really.
yep.
So it is a matter of, okay, fine, we know that those triggers are there. Let's find ways to deal with it, ways that we know and we feel comfortable with, that we can
Yeah,
instantly click
yeah,
into
yep.
when that happens.
And I think that's the beautiful thing is you've absolutely nailed it, Anita. You start with what is doable and very, very accessible when you are shooting through the top of your window of tolerance, right? When you're going up into that activated sense, that activated space, and you go with the things that you know work and that are pretty easily accessible, right? And the idea is that, okay, then once that starts to work and you feel what regulating yourself is like and how powerful that makes you feel, how in beautiful level of control. I say to people all the time, we're not talking about stranglehold control. We're talking about a very, a nice way where I'm making decisions for myself, where I'm in the middle of the decision making.
Yes.
Right. And that's a beautiful sense of control. And then, you're building your repertoire. When you feel ready, you start to increase the number of tools you have at your disposal, and you get familiar with the next set you introduce and you use them a bit, and then you're like, okay, all right. And then on we go.
I feel like there's the bigger picture. There's the things that we can put into our lives on a week-to-week basis. We can do yoga. We can make sure that we exercise regularly. That, like, obviously two passions of mine, and that's great for that bigger picture. We can make sure that we get enough sleep and we eat well and all those sort of things, and we know all that. But in the moment, that's not good advice. Like, in the moment, it's not, oh, you should do more yoga. That's not helping me right now.
That's right.
What is going to help me is knowing that I can just extract myself and go and have a shower. Or I can just, take it to the person who I know will be receptive and say, I need a hug, or I'm just going out for a walk, or whatever happens to be. But I feel like there's that bigger picture of helping us not to get into those situations, but also there's that reactive, where do we go when we are?
And it's so interesting. I'll give you an example of that. So when I had, the decade of disaster, my husband.
I love how you've named it.
I know.
It's completed now. It's finished, so it's good.
Yeah, it's my shorthand, and actually, and I did do a TEDx talk, which I will make sure you can put in the show notes.
I will definitely put that
so that people can get an insight. But we don't want to waste time on it now. But one of the things, showers is, so it's so interesting that should come up, but water and showers is really important to me. My husband would know. He would be able to walk in and say to me, how many showers have you had today?
16 showers later.
And, if I said, oh, look, yeah, I've had 4. And he's like, okay, yeah, okay. You okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. Right. But by the same token, what I started doing then, and I still do now, is I go to my gym. It has a pool, and I walk and swim because I'm enveloped in beautiful warm water. And then I do have the luxury of, they do have a nice little spa room, and I pay extra to get into there because I know, just as you've said, being in yoga, like yoga movements, of course, what is it doing? It's elongating the time between our thoughts while connecting with our physical being. I love it, right? So you find what works for you, and then you invest in that so that you can try and increase the window of tolerance, because it's like a little bit like an accordion or the old sash window that goes up and down, right? And across the day, it will move. But like you said, we don't want to find ourselves living with a really, really tiny window in the long term. Okay. We want to try and get it so we've got some space to move up and down, and we're not pushing through that window and going into our sympathetic nervous system. And the thing we haven't talked about is what happens when we go through the bottom of that window. And that's another conversation. But that's when that's when we become quite dorsal, and we feel exhausted, and we feel we've got nothing left in the tank.
I feel like we've all been there at some stage.
Absolutely. And it's human nature. And sometimes, many of us, will know, oh, I got really, really sick and I was forced
Yeah.
to rest,
Yes.
So
Your body stood up and said, look, this is it. Enough
yeah,
is enough. And
yeah,
it does take it takes people often a big health event to actually stop
yes,
and to reconsider, which is sad that we let it get to that. So
yeah.
that's what we're trying to help people with.
Well, and that's right, because we do. I mean, it's
Mm.
cliched, but prevention is cure, and
Yeah,
we
it is.
want to try and maintain our mental health and well-being,
Yeah.
and that helps us maintain our physical health and
Yeah,
well-being.
it's all connected. Like we talk about this all the time at the
Absolutely.
studio. It's like you can't separate mental
Absolutely.
health and physical health. It
No,
is so, so connected.
I'm the same.
Exactly. We are the
Mm.
same. We are one person.
Yeah.
So it has been so nice chatting to you. Gosh.
Ah,
I could go on for hours, but we are going to have to come to the end. And
yeah.
Mel, what are three takeaways that you
So,
can share with listeners
yes.
today?
So I actually wrote these down because I wrote, number one is to remember that the journey of self reclamation, so to speak, is ongoing, and
Yeah.
it's never going to be a one and done exercise, and to just allow yourself to understand that, and a little bit of just curiously go with the flow.
Okay.
Right? There's no end point. And I know, and if you're feeling exhausted, you might be like, but also I think I want you to know that so that you take the pressure off yourself
Yeah.
to get to some end destination.
Otherwise, it's like we have to sort of tick it off. Okay, we have completed this, tick, done. So it's not like that. It's an ongoing thing. That takes a lot. It actually does relieve a lot of pressure.
Yeah, just it's okay, right? To go, okay, it's ongoing. And the second one I had was, it is about embracing the process. And this is always interesting, because when we feel out of control and we want to reclaim control, we can tend to think about outcomes, and it's about just slowing down and reorientating to the process. Yeah, so that stuff about, well, who am I? What did I do in the past that I really loved, that demonstrates my strengths, that shows when I'm right in my wheelhouse, and bringing that forward and celebrating those achievements.
And we need time to consider that and to actually really think about that, sort of almost that let it stew kind of,
absolutely
phrase of old, but
exactly.
do let it stew.
Yeah, let it stew, let it percolate, just go and, like a good strong cup of coffee,
It's
right?
funny.
Let it to the boil.
I have one example. It was years and years ago, and I hadn't known my husband very long, and he was just, and I'm very much like always doing things, and he was just sitting on the sofa. I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm thinking." I'm like, "What the hell? What is that? You have to be doing something. Like, what do you mean you're just sitting there thinking?" But he was thinking. He wanted to find a solution to something, and he was thinking about it.
Yep.
And to me, that was just like, I still remember it to this day.
Because it was so foreign to you.
My family didn't sit around thinking. It was just always like you had to do something.
And yet, this is also why you go to have a group of a tribe of people, a group of people who you can connect with, because you're right. My family didn't do it like that. Oh, that's curious. What does it feel like to sit and think?
Yes.
But look, the third is, with time, space, and grace, you can really reclaim your confidence, right? And help yourself move away from what you might be feeling right now, which is a little bit of confusion and fear and self-judgment. But I really think that idea of, just turning the volume down, take, a little bit like releasing the pressure on the pressure cooker.
Totally.
And just giving yourself that time, space, and grace.
I love that time, space, and grace.
Yeah.
It feels like a big deep breath, doesn't it?
Right. And it's
Beautiful.
that thing about, it's a way to a shortcut to say, give yourself permission to do that.
Yeah.
Right. If you write nothing down out of anything we've talked about today, it might be those 3 words that you pop on your dashboard.
Yeah.
You pop on your mirror. you pop on your computer around your workstation, and just a little reminder to anchor you to the idea that it's okay to look after yourself and to just take a moment.
Yeah, I love that. Mel, where can people find you?
Oh, look, the easiest way to connect with me is just through the website, which is www.collectivewisdomcoaching.com. All the socials are there. And you can, book a connection call and chat with me. People might have got an idea that I like to chat. I don't know.
Never.
Or
Well,
Anita.
I've already planned out the next episode. So we're going to have part 1 and part 2. I'm excited. I'm already looking forward to it.
I love it.
Thank you so much, Mel, for being on Midlife Unraveled. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you and to share all your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Go gently, everybody.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, share and subscribe so you can stay updated with more from Midlife Unraveled. To see more Midlife Unraveled, follow us at midlifeunraveled.com or at Midlife Unraveled on Facebook and Instagram. We'll see you soon.